Any horror fan worth his salt has at least seen John Carpenter's famous remake, The Thing. It is, to me, one of my all-time favorite horror movies. Though it wasn't appreciated in its time, its long afterlife led it to being one of the most prolific cult hits ever. It became famous enough that properties based around it decades later were able to secure huge budgets for their creation. Such things like The Thing 2011, which could have been good if the practical effects they had planned weren't forced to be scrapped by know-nothing producers whose hands should have never been on the project to begin with. But that's a story for another time. That movie had more issues than just its CG. But let's take this as a sign to indicate a recurring problem in properties related to The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing was a near-perfect creation, but it would be the only project related to it that we could say that about. The 2002 game of the same name for PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC by Computer Artworks, Vivendi, and Konami may have been good for its time, but unlike the film, it has aged pretty poorly. That said, fans of the movie should have had issues with this game's narrative to begin with, yet this game scored pretty high praise at its release. But we'll get into all that shortly. So I played this game on PlayStation 2, and it might not be the best version of the game out there, but what follows is my take, looking at a game for the first time that is loosely based around the events of one of my all-time favorite movies. We begin with some shots basically designed to pull on the strings of nostalgia for fans of the movie. Arctic setting, research base, destruction, and monsters directly in line with the sort of twisted Lovecraftian design John Carpenter's film was known for. We jump ahead a bit to our main character, Average Joe Mr. Military Man, arriving at the base to investigate the cause of the destruction. Straight from his introduction, the tone of the game already feels off from what I was expecting coming from the movie, where the glorification of guns and soldiers is nowhere to be found. Within minutes, we're introduced to our main character's backup crew of soldiers. They all get one line of dialogue and are more or less forgotten about forever. It's definitely a bit of an issue in this game where none of the characters have personality. Granted, most of them are designed to be disposed of without a moment's notice, but even our main character, our hero, is boiled down to schlocky action dialogue. One-liners and machismo attitude can have their time and place, but in a game like this, always and everywhere is definitely not a good time or place. At the worst of times, it's horribly misplaced comedic relief. Take this one for example.
Hey, looks like your last girlfriend.
Despite none of them having cool personalities and having a poor introduction, your squad actually has a system of mechanics that makes them a pretty cool addition to the gameplay. Different squad members specialize in different fields. Medics can heal you and your men without the need of resources. However, they cannot heal themselves, so keeping them alive to keep everybody else alive will be up to you. We have a basic soldier who's just here to provide more firepower, and we almost always have an engineer who can repair broken door locks and electronics as you trek your way through the base. Oftentimes, if they die, it's game over, as they are required in many stages to progress. Another cool thing is this game's take on sanity. Soldiers all have sanity meters represented by their body language on the squad menu. Sometimes after seeing too much horrific imagery, your squad members may freeze up. Generally, to get them to calm down, all you need to do is ask them to follow you. Take them outside away from the gruesome imagery and give them a minute to collect themselves. If their trust in you is low, however, because you either forgot to give them weapons or decided to take their weapons from them, you'll have a tough time getting them to comply with anything you say. In dire times, you can give them adrenaline shots to help them focus, though I never found this too necessary myself. At one point in my gameplay, I decided to shoot one of my men to see if I could get them to listen, or scare the others into listening after seeing this happen, but that didn't work out too well for me, where they all immediately turned on me and gunned me down. But you can actually coerce them into listening if you just point a gun at their head for long enough. As I said earlier though, squad members have no personality, and they're basically put in the game to be cannon fodder. They can die to simple enemy attacks, or like the movie, become infected without you knowing, only to transform and attack you and your squad members further down the line. This is a cool idea, and about as cool as the game gets when converting the themes of the movie. How it uses its suspense and antitrust to build an oppressive and tense atmosphere. Throughout the base, you'll find medical guns to take blood from your teammates. You use this as a test to see if they've become infected. These guns are limited in supply and not recommended to be used recklessly. I like the idea of this mechanic, but I would like it even more if it wasn't total bullshit. At certain points, I found the game just kind of forgot that this is how things worked, and I'll show you an example here. Without cutting a single piece of footage, I walk over to this guy, I administer the blood test, and he comes out clean.
All right, let's do this.
I dick around a bit, not sure what I was doing here. And now he's a monster. What the hell happened in the 4 seconds I wasn't looking? We established in the movie and several times in the game that genetic takeovers don't happen this fast. So he was clearly infected when I administered the test, proving that in this game the test doesn't actually do anything. This is the coolest idea the game had, and sadly it's just smoke and mirrors. Thankfully, other things work mostly as intended. When exploring outside, there's an exposure meter. If you're out too long in the cold, you will start taking damage and eventually die. I can see some people disliking this, just as they did in Metroid Prime 2. But it added a layer to the general exploration and a sort of race against the clock kind of mechanic that kept things interesting as you risked traveling off the beaten path in hopes of finding rewards. And though there are rewards, sadly some of them are just downright insulting. If you ever wondered what happened to Childs at the end of the movie, this game will tell you. Same with MacCready. The power in the way the movie ended was in the lingering questions left behind. Questions that honestly should have been left unanswered, especially considering the answers we got. Though I guess John Carpenter didn't mind too much, as he is quoted on the back of the case as having said, "This is one intense action horror game. You gotta play this one. Man, it'll blast you against the wall." Yeah, I don't know about that one there, Mr. Carpenter. Though it was cool fan service early on in the game when you came across a recorded voice message from MacCready. Otherwise, all of the references to the movies and all of the questions that they answered are just fucking ridiculous. So, the way the game handles the themes of the movie and turns them into gameplay elements is pretty cool, even though some of it's total bullshit. But outside of this, gameplay is just not really what I would expect from a property of this sort. The Thing the game is just a third-person shooter, very indicative of the era. All the aiming is auto-aim and the controls are pretty rough. There's 3 control schemes, the third of which being the most modernized and the one I used. Animation is very Max Payne-ish, though the camera can definitely use some work, especially in cramped places like vents. You can go into first person for manual aim, but you do this from a standstill, and it's not exactly useful in combat scenarios. But it will be required once or twice to solve puzzles. Most enemies can be killed by simply shooting them, but others will need to be burned once they reach low HP. This is another cool way to convert the movie's themes into gameplay elements, but like most things, it's not without its annoyances. While standing, your flamethrower will spray the ground with fire. Fire lingers for a while and allows you to form these sort of walls to block enemies into certain areas with. The downside here is how close to your feet the fire spray generally is, making it way too easy to torch yourself in the process, and if you don't torch yourself, you may torch your teammates, though that's more often than not their fault and not yours. To burn enemies without burning the ground, you need to fire from a crouching position. It's all just very cumbersome. For prolonged periods throughout the game, you will actually find yourself fighting mostly human enemies, and this fire mechanic gets rather abandoned. And during these sections, the game actually plays much more nicely. It's kind of a shame, but this definitely would have all worked better if it weren't trying to be a game based on the movie and converting some of the movie's ideas into gameplay elements. Sure, stripping back on the movie-inspired mechanics may have made this as generic as third-person shooters can come, but at least the experience would be smooth. Unfortunately, the bosses, what should be the coolest part of the game, is where all the problems compound, and it becomes the worst part of the game. There's very few of these, but they are an absolute mess. From poor cameras, poor controls, and environment designs, some bosses with attacks that are nearly impossible to dodge, to other bosses that are so exploitable they can't possibly hit you. It is a sad state of affairs. At the very least, they looked kind of cool, but the imagery alone isn't worth the frustration. The Thing the game is really all over the place. It hits you up front with some cool ideas, only for half of them to be underutilized or poorly implemented, and for others to eventually reveal themselves as complete falsehoods. Maybe this game had enough cool ideas to garner its high ratings at release, but now, looking back, I don't know, it just feels too transparent and clunky. It seemed cool at the start, then fell apart very quickly. About a third of the way through the game, we abandon half the mechanics along with the monsters, and the game evens out to be a much better experience. Albeit a far more generic one. After suffering through all this game's trials and tribulations, the final boss is an insulting turret section that I'm not even sure you can lose. The game looks okay for the age, and the setting is really nice. The music and atmospheric effects lend itself very well to what they were trying to achieve, but otherwise I can't deny feeling like nothing actually worked together without fault here. One day I would like to see all of these ideas revisited, with more of a modern spin and without insulting the original creation, but that may be a long ways off. As it is, the best thing I've seen related to The Thing at all is that one episode of The X-Files that bordered very closely on being too derivative, but was at least still a great episode nonetheless. And unfortunately, that's where I'm gonna leave this one. I was rather excited to go back and check this out, but yeah, time and its changes have maybe altered my perspective on this too much, and I simply could not praise this game enough to be recommended to anybody. Die-hard fans, I feel, would be insulted by the narrative decisions, and fans of shooters and horror games will find gameplay that ranges from clunky to average, with little else to hang on to. There's lots of great ideas, but there's very little effort put into making them work. And that's all I'm gonna say on The Thing, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps not the best one to go back and look back on this Halloween. If you guys liked the video or found it useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all my socials are in the description, as well as my Patreon. And as always, folks, thanks for watching.